Great. So the light is bad because it gets dark super early and I still do not have a ring light. Hopefully soon. But I wanted to do a video on things you need to be able to do in order to write. And this is my secret, unpopular opinion, so very controversial. I'm making this because I like writing. It is an ongoing hobby of mine. I really enjoy it, and I have some thoughts that I wanted to get out on the YouTube. Thing number one that you need to be able to write is command of language. And by command of language, I don't mean that you always know there, which one to use every single time without looking it up. That's what Google is for, to look up things that you're not sure about and learn something that you did not know before. Instead, you need to be able to use language to express your ideas. You need to emphasize the important things and show the relationship between things. You need to know not just the literal meaning of words, but the nuances behind them. You need to be able to build ideas off of each other and decide which words get the most emphasis. You need to know the difference between she was tall and beautiful, or she was statuesque, which is tall and beautiful, or she was tall but beautiful, because the second one implies that tall women are not beautiful, which is false. And to get this command of language, to feel that you're really conveying your ideas in the most vivid and easy to understand way possible, you don't necessarily need to study in any particular way, but you do need to be very picky. You do need to be willing to just sit there and poke at things until they're absolutely perfect. You need to go over the same sentence again and again and again in each draft. And if there's anything slightly wonky about it, just be like, okay, what if I change this? What if I change this? What if I change this? Until like you nail it and you get the absolute perfect sentence. Some people might be thinking, that sounds like a lot of very boring, very finicky work that probably isn't going to make that big a difference. Like, if the reader can understand what I'm trying to say, if they understand the basic meaning, and even if they're a little bit confused, if they catch on to the correct meaning eventually, why do you have to be so picky? Why do you have to keep poking at it and working at it and angsting about every single little detail? Why would you do that to yourself? And that is a good question, but it is not a question I can answer, because my question is, why wouldn't you? I'm sorry. Sitting there and poking at every little word in a sentence is my idea of a good time. For me, settling for it's not perfect, but it works, it's close enough sentence is like, it's like if my muse handed me a handful of delicious Reese's candies and I was like, thank you. And because I'm a little bit clumsy and I'm not perfect, I dropped some of them on the ground. I'm like, oh no, my candies, they fell. In that moment, I could either pick up the candies and either enjoy them myself or share them with my friends, or I could leave delicious Reese's candies on the sidewalk to go bad and melt in the sun and become disgusting. And for me, not finessing a sentence until it's the best it possibly could be is like leaving delicious Reese's candies to go bad and not be enjoyed by anyone. It's easier, but why would you throw away Reese's? Point 2. In addition to having a good use of language, you need to have focus when you are telling your story. Because if everything sounds very pretty and flows very nicely, but there's lots of stuff in there where the reader's just like, why is this here? Is this important? I don't know what's important. I don't know where this is going. And it's a lot of pretty words and pretty sentences, but it is not a story. Now, I like some pretty quiet, pretty slow-moving stories. The anime Haibana Renmei is a very good example of a story that moves very slowly, and a lot of it is just the characters enjoying their environment, but which still has forward momentum, still has themes that's developing, still has questions that the characters are asking and that the reader is curious about the answer of. Answer to. There we go. I cannot use language, not while I'm talking, only while I'm writing. So even though I like some pretty slow moving stuff, I still appreciate when I can tell that a storyteller has a vision for why every scene and every interaction is there, and I don't feel like things are there that are being wasted, that are just there to fill time. If you read short stories and essays by amateur writers, especially if they're writing something from their own life, like a travelogue, it often really drags just because you feel like this person is putting in every single detail just because it really happened. They don't have a vision for why this moment, why this incident was so important for them, and what details need to be there to convey that importance. That's a higher level of understanding than just write down things the way they happened. You actually have to put some critical thinking into it. I remember reading a script for a short play that was supposed to be targeted for elementary school students, and it was by a friend of a friend, and I don't know this person. Hopefully I'll never meet this person, but the synopsis I read was that it's about a stolen pot sticker and a older sibling who's feeling a bit meh about a new baby in the family. I was like, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. But the 5 pages that I read of this short play, I don't think the pot sticker ever showed up, and I don't think the kid ever showed up. It was mostly from the point of view of the kid's friend. So if I had just read that opening section, I would not have been able to guess that synopsis, not even a little bit. It also sounded like something that would be very boring to watch as a live performance because there's a lot of old ladies gossiping. You're probably thinking, does that fit that plot? And I'm wondering the same thing. It didn't make any sense. I'm hoping that was a very early first draft, and if it was continued, it got cut down quite a bit. I think that really talented writers have a way of dropping you right into the main conflict. Even if their story starts on something that's a little bit more trivial, you don't have to engage with the work for very long before you get a sense of what this is and where it's going to go. You don't know all the details for sure, but you're like, ooh, this is about this person, and the question is, are they going to do this or are they going to do this? I am interested. In my writing, even while I do like to be very flowery, I do like to be very low-key and spend time on description and low-stakes character interactions, I also need to keep in mind that I'm telling a story. I'm telling cause and effect. Okay, so this happened, and oh boy, because that happened, this other thing happened, and then this character had to make a decision. Is she going to deal with this problem? Is she going to do something else? Let's see what she does. And if I don't feel like I'm telling that kind of a this leads to this to someone, then I lose interest in my own stories. If I'm telling a scene and I'm just like, people sitting around talking and nothing happening, then it's so boring to me. I can't stand it. If I feel like it's just a scene without a conflict, without any thematic meaning, without establishing anything about the world of the characters, then I just want to cut it. Point number 3, you need to be able to use your editor power, and you need to be brave enough to use your editor power, because when you are a writer, you are just putting words on a page, you're just typing on a screen, and you can wipe it all out anytime you want. You can create something new anytime you want. That is a lot of power, and it takes practice to know how to use that power effectively. A good example of a scene that needs editing is anytime someone says, "As you know," or "Let's go over the plan one more time. As you know, the plan is this," and then they list out a long plan just so the reader knows it. And it's really boring. I'm always like, well, can we hear the first time they're making the plan? Can we hear them hashing out the plan and how they're voicing competing ideas and collaborating with each other to make the perfect plan? We could have two characters trying to quiz each other on what the plan is. We could have two characters arguing, one who really likes the plan, one who absolutely hates the plan. There are so many ways you could convey the same information, and sometimes you just kind of have to play with it until you get the one that has the biggest emotional punch and is the most interesting to read. I don't think that a writer has total control over the story. I don't think that you can necessarily choose which method of telling certain information works best. Sometimes you just have to throw stuff on the page and see what works best. And sometimes the thing you really want to work will not work at all. It'll just be boring and terrible, and something that you think is not going to work actually turns out to be really cool and fun. But I think you need to be open to different ways of telling a story. You need to be a little bit creative and not just be like, well, I wrote it this way, this information needs to be there somehow, so now I can't change it. I know you are bored when character B launches into, "As you know, Bob, our perfect heist plan is," for 3 pages. But I have to convey the heist plan because the heist is a big plot point and I need to explain it in this chapter. So therefore, I cannot change anything. Well, of course you can. You're the writer. You're the god of this universe. You just have to be open-minded and curious and be willing to finesse and go over the same chapter again and again and again until it's not just a chapter that works and kind of conveys the meaning that needs to be conveyed, but conveys it in the most fun, creative, and exciting way. With exposition in particular, I think you often need a lot less than you think you need. Often, readers will be able to connect the dots if you provide them enough key information. A lot of things can be conveyed just through how people react, through their word choice, through their body language, through the kind of questions they ask or don't ask. And I think if you're good at thinking those world-building details through and making sure you're in your character's head and you're like, okay, knowing how this world works and what my character knows, they would have to respond this way in this situation. Sometimes you can just like take off the first paragraph of a chapter and take off the last paragraph, and then it's you figure out you don't actually need all that setup. and all that wind down. An editor thing that happened with me recently was I was trying to rewrite an opening to make it less boring, and it was kind of an exposition heavy opening, even though it was also poetic. But while I was supposed to be at work, I spent 5 minutes writing a dialogue opening. And the dialogue was not that good either. But I showed it to some people who had seen the original opening and said, I don't know, it's kind of slow. You can make a stronger hook. And they were like, ooh, like in like 3 lines of dialogue, you conveyed all these things about the character and the setting. That's kind of cool. It really just throws you in the middle there. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess there is a point to trying something different. Point number 4. You need to be able to match what you're telling to what you're showing. Or to put it another way, you need to be able to tell the difference between a story with something and a story about something. This is getting into slightly higher level media analysis because I think it does take some level of critical thinking ability to be able to say, in this movie, the characters keep saying this one thing, let's say black magic, is bad. And I think that the creators also want us to think that black magic is bad because they make it look kind of woobly and creepy every time it shows up. But actually, black magic solves a lot of the characters' problems. And I'm not sure it really has any downsides. Like, it's kind of a weird, creepy black cloud, but main characters use it and they seem to be able to use it without hurting people. By the way, I'm also watching Dragon Prince. So in this case, you have a stated message which might be conveyed through the words of characters we're supposed to like. And again, critical analysis is being able to tell which characters we're supposed to like. The way things work is not quite the way characters say they're working. One film where character opinion does not quite line up with reality, and this might just be a case of characters being wrong, that's left open to interpretation in the movie, is Turning Red, where the main character, Mei Mei, turns into a big, fluffy, adorable red panda, and people keep warning her that she's going to lose control of the panda sooner or later if she keeps turning into it. Like, it'll just take over in this, like, Jekyll and Hyde relationship. But what we see from Mei Mei is that she actually becomes more and more proficient in using the panda. At the beginning of the movie, she's not able to control when she turns into it, but at the end, she's able to control very well and very flexibly when she turns into the panda and when she turns back into the girl. She does do some antisocial behavior as the panda. She pushes another kid and she throws a dodgeball at him. But I'm not sure if it's the panda making Mei do those things or if Mei just has a lot of anger that she's been repressing. I almost feel like the panda is feeding off of Mei's more, I guess, her id, rather than the panda having a different personality that's taking over. And I think maybe the relatives are just wrong because apparently they're descended from this awesome badass panda warrior and they've lost sight of that. So maybe we're just supposed to say they were wrong the entire time. I don't think every piece of art has to have a very definitive message. Sometimes it works better if you just show a complex situation in a way that's relatable and true to life. But I do think you need to be mindful of what you are showing. You need to think through your examples, think through how things actually work in the world of the characters, and again, use your editing power and say, well, what if it happened this way? What if it happened this slightly different way? What if it happened this other way? Which one conveys the kind of story I want to tell the best? I think you can get away with having a lot of somewhat problematic elements in your story if you are mindful of how you're using them, if you actually consider what are like the different ramifications of this, how does it look to different people, what are some of the consequences that people might experience. I was recently watching some videos on Lore Olympus, the comic book, and I haven't read up to where all the analysis was going, so there's some things that were discussed in the video that I haven't read yet. But one of the things they brought up is that at times in this comic, abuse is treated very seriously, and it's clear that the characters are not behaving well. And at other times, characters will behave in world in just as messed up ways, but it's funny somehow. For example, there's a scene where someone's eye gets plucked out, and it's sort of funny, and there's not a lot of ramifications for the characters who do it because they're supposed to be likable characters. And there's other situations where, say, a woman slaps her partner, and that's like, hey, why'd she do that? That's so mean. It's a comic where that does want to discuss abuse, but the creator was not necessarily thinking through every instance of abuse in the comic and really considering, okay, like, these are all serious and this one could be problematic, so I'm going to put in some framing to show that it is not as serious in this world for these people. Like, again, you kind of have to sit with what you're making and be like, man, this, but if I put this here, like, that kind of like sheds a different light on this thing, and how can I actually juxtapose those in a way that makes sense and doesn't make it look like I'm laughing at this form of abuse because it's a character we don't like, whereas this abuse against a character that I do like is serious and should be taken seriously. And finally, after all that rambling, point 5, you need a modicum of depth. You don't need to be a genius, but you do need to have some reflection, some ability to look beyond the surface. You have to be able to sit with yourself and be able to come to the conclusion of, what do I think? What do I notice? What do I feel? And you need to be able to see things on your own without someone pointing them out to you, because otherwise you'll always be manipulated by what other people are telling you, and you won't have a single original thought in your head. And that does not make for good writing. You need to be able to say, why? How? What else? How did that happen? How does that work? What else might happen? What might have happened instead? Asking yourself all those questions. You need to be able to put yourself in another person's shoes in order to develop your characters, to say, okay, this person, they just came from this situation, this is their goal, this is the type of person they are, what are they going to do, what's going to come out of their mouth? And be able to go through that with each person in your story, so that you don't have characters where their motivation is switching, doing a complete 180 between scenes, or where characters who are not alike at all sound alike for no reason besides the fact that the author just wrote their dialogue on the same day and didn't bother to ever rewrite it. Research is definitely good for developing depth, but it is not a substitute for depth. You could... depth. Blah. I cannot talk. You can read all the books, all the articles, watch all the videos, but if you don't have a way of sorting through the information that you're receiving and deciding what is important and what needs to be in your story and what is less important, if you don't have a vision of where you would like to go, then research still will not produce a good, compelling story. And that comes back into the point about focus. You need to have some idea of where you're going with this. Otherwise, you could do a bunch of research and then the research will be in there in the final product, but it'll sound like you're just citing a bunch of random facts. It won't actually improve the story. And you might research some facts and still have the characters behaving in a completely bizarre way that contradicts those facts because you haven't put yourself in their shoes and actually use those facts to determine how you're writing them. I think you also need a modicum of self-awareness because if you haven't worked through your shit, you don't have to work through all your shit. You just need to be kind of in that process, be willing to do it. If you haven't worked through your stuff, then you're going to put that all in your story and you're not even going to know you're doing it. And you might not see that it's all going in there, but your readers will definitely see it. One example that I read recently is this book called The Invisible Library, where the characters are kind of secret agents working for an alternate dimension organization. And the main character, I would not be surprised to learn that the author grew up in a fundamentalist religion, because the main character just behaves like someone who was raised in a cult. And I'm hoping that goes somewhere in later books, but in the first book it is bizarre. This character spends at least half of her mental energy in every single scene stamping down her emotions. Not just stamping down her reactions and controlling them so that she maintains her secret identity and her facade of professionalism, which would be understandable, but stamping down her annoyance, stamping down her affection for other characters. Little things that don't really affect anything, and it's never explained why she does this, whose influence made her this way. Other agents that we meet do not act this way. They have their own other problems, but they show their emotions and nothing really bad comes of that. They are able to do their jobs very effectively. But this main character, for some reason, like, people will be having a conversation and there'll be a line like, main character resisted the urge to roll her eyes and kick partner under the table. She forced herself to respond with utmost politeness. I'm like, huh, like, I wonder what she could do if she wasn't so busy forcing herself not to do these things. Would this scene have gone any difference if she had kicked partner under the table or had displayed annoyance? And it just really reminds me of accounts I've heard by people who are raised in fundamentalist religions like evangelicalism or Mormonism, where they're just constantly in their heads policing everything they do, and they're exhausted because so much of their energy goes into that. And I'm just like weirdly fascinated that this author wrote a character who behaves exactly like this, but never like gives the reason. It's almost like she just thinks everyone has to, but the other characters don't act like that. And I'm so curious. And I kind of feel like the author just thinks this is normal, like everyone's doing this. I'm like, they're not. I wonder if you're a musician, or if you're an artist, or if you do crafts or some other kind of handiwork, can you be a shallow person and still do that very well? I think probably. But I don't think you can be a shallow person and still write well. I think you can write in a very appealing way to some audiences, but I don't think you can be a writer. I still think that no matter how good your style is, people will read your stuff once and be like, oh, okay, that was cute. And they'll never think about it again. You can't make something that makes people think, really holds their attention and engages their emotions, unless you're the kind of person who has an original thought, notices things, is curious about things, puts ideas together in an interesting way, is in touch with their emotions, and knows how to portray those emotions in a way that others can also feel them. And there's many, many ways to do that, but I don't think a shallow person can do that. Like I said, there are some unpopular opinions here, but I have rambled so long. I'm gonna wind this up, and I don't have a good way to end this. I'm gonna break my own rules and just say bye. Thanks for watching.